Today I'm with Kun Don Pathan, the senior nation expert on the southern part of Thailand. Welcome, Kun Don.
Thank you.
Well, regarding the insurgency in the southern part of Thailand, what is the situation right now?
Well, for the past 4 months, we have seen some really some serious violence on the ground. A lot of army outposts and civilians as well have come under attack by the insurgents, and it's not getting any better.
Right. So what does this wave of insurgency, how is it different from the old generation?
Compared to the previous generation that went down in the early 90s, this generation is very decentralized. They're very organic. Unlike the previous generation, they have some degree of institutional discipline, meaning that there's some degree of rules of engagement. The same thing cannot be said about this generation because they don't have that kind of institution, organizations that they fall under. Like in the old days, you have a lot of groups like PULO, BRN, BIPP, GMIP. Now, after the 90s, in the 90s, they went under. The military wing went under. Since 2001, what we have seen is a new generation of Malay Muslim separatists who've taken up arms against the state. And essentially, basically, there's a gap, a generation gap, as well as a gap in terms of ideas and approaches between the old guards and the new generation.
Well, the old guards were in the 60s.
Well, the first group, they surfaced in the late 60s.
Late 60s.
But didn't really go down until the early 90s, militarily.
Right.
And so after they went down, many of the leaders went into exile or resided in neighboring countries, and some in Europe, like Sweden. Many live in Malaysia, Indonesia. And so that explained why, since for the past 7 or 8 years, some of the Thai officials have reached out to neighboring countries to help facilitate some of the secret meetings with the old guard. The whole idea is to get the old guard into the fold, into the picture, and so they can talk to the new generation and talk some sense to them. At least try to bring them to some sort of a peace process or a peace dialogue.
So has the government position changed in terms of talking with this separatists in Pattani, Malay? Well,
this government and the previous government doesn't have a policy on that because it's unconstitutional, it's illegal, basically.
Right.
But having said that, the Thai authorities, military and civilian, mostly military, have been talking to the separatists since mid-70s in Mid-East countries. But with the old guards. But these dialogue have no real impact on policy because they were treated more or less as news gathering or intelligence exercise rather than an attempt to come up with a new direction, a new policy for the Pattanese, for the Malays of Pattani. But after the coup in 2006, the then Prime Minister, General Surayut, also tried to revive this issue. He issued, tried to formalize it, put it that way. He issued an executive order authorizing officials to engage in dialogue with armed groups. He didn't say which one. And on a couple of occasions, General Surayut in 2007 thanked the international community. He singled out Malaysia, as well as the United Nations for helping Thailand facilitating some of these secret dialogue with the Thai authorities. But after the mandate was returned to the people, the two following administration didn't really follow on it. They could just kind of like, they didn't put, it was kind of bogged down with the yellow shirt and the red shirts mess, so.
That's right.
But this administration made the South, the Deep South, one of its priority you know.
So how would you judge the different administration approaches at the difference on the policy?
Well, there was some optimism at first with this administration, you know, the idea of bringing back civilian supremacy to the Deep South and all that. But at the end, he retreated on this, the very issue of civilian supremacy. Another issue that we haven't seen any real progress is the issue of justice. Justice for the people, for the victims on both sides, the Buddhist and the Muslim, and Malay Muslim, especially Malay Muslim suspect imams and leaders who have died under custody,
right.
While under custody of the government officials. We haven't really seen any progress on that. This administration relied heavily on the bureaucrats to push through their initiative, their programs. But if we agree that this conflict is essentially it's about Thailand nation statehood, it's about the construct of Thai nation state construct, and the refusal of the Patani Malay to buy into that construct because they embrace a different narrative than the Thai state. You know, they have their own heroes, history, heroine, the myth, you know, the legends, and which is completely different set from the Thai state. If we agreed on that, then the violence down there is basically an extension of that failed negotiation between the state and the Patani Malay. In my opinion, the only way out is to negotiate this narrative, to negotiate this space, the same way that you know, that other ethnic minorities in this country, you know, negotiate and establish what we call a comfort level between the state and its minority. And with the Thai state and the Patani Malay, we haven't seen that comfort. We haven't reached that comfort level yet, and I don't really know if and when we will reach that. But to do that, I think any administration or every administration would have to go beyond the bureaucratic means. And for this administration, I haven't seen that.
The creativity to go beyond that means.
Right, yeah, you have to think outside of the box, you know. You can't just rely on the bureaucrats to do this, you know, restructuring of SBPAC, the Southern Border Provinces Administrative Center. I think you have to go beyond that, you know, to come up with something that really hit at the heart of this narrative. You know, what that basically define the Patani Malay, who they are, why they're different, why don't they embrace, you know, the Thai state constructed identity or the Thai state narrative.
Right, I see. So for the past 4 months, it has been severe brutality over there. What is the future trend?
I don't think it's, you know, it comes and goes, this kind of thing. It's really hard to map the security situation down south because the cells are very organic, you know, they're very decentralized. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a shared, they don't have a network. They do have a network, but the decision to hit or to carry out attacks are carried out at the local level. Now, every now and then they meet with the old guards who basically since 2004 are trying to convince the international community, the Thai state, that they're also a mediator. They can mediate with the new generation, right? And that at the same time, some present themselves as stakeholder as well. I'm not really sure you could be both. You can be a mediator and a stakeholder at the same time. It's a bit of a conflict of interest, in my opinion. But having said that, you know, Thai officials often tell me they want to talk directly to the insurgent on the ground, but the insurgent will not surface because, you know, according to the old guards, they see this as a ploy to get them to surface.
It's a big joke.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say a big joke because they don't trust. There's no trust, you know. I mean, so essentially, you will still have to rely on the old guards to work to function as some sort of a political wing, so to speak. But my point is that to have that arrangement, you have the insurgent on the ground. The old guard could be the political wing, the Thai state on one hand. In that arrangement, I think all sides has to agree on that, and kind of work behind the radar screen, you know, public radar screen, and work on the same sheet of music. We're not there yet. I think this will be a long time before we get there. We might need the help of neighboring countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, because a lot of these old guards live there.
Right.
And in Europe too, most of them live in Sweden, some in Germany, some in Holland. So it requires a lot of people, a lot of parties, a lot of stakeholders to come together.
Will ASEAN integration help on this matter?
No, it's not an ASEAN issue at all. If anything, it's but people, Malay or Patani, see themselves as part of the Malay civilization. They often talk about the glorious past, how this area was once the cradle of Islamic civilization for Southeast Asia. And when I say Malay-speaking world, I'm talking about from southern Thailand, from, say, Chana, south of Hat Yai, all the way to Mindanao in the Philippines. They more or less speak similar language. More or less practice the same brand of Islam. And Patani was, in that context, in the context of Malay world, Patani had its place. It was a cultural center, religious center, commercial center. But today, that Rome of the past have been reduced to
only three provinces.
Only 3 provinces of Thai state. That doesn't really recognize this, or don't want to acknowledge this glorious past.
Correct.
Of the. Every society have their myth. And I think, have their legend, have their stories, have their narrative. And I think it's important to respect that. And I think the violence is part of that failure to respect that. And
right.
The attempted negotiation have failed. I always believe that the Malays of Patani are willing to be part of Thailand, but it has to be on their own terms. And this historical narrative, along with their identity and their cultural characteristic, uniqueness, also part of those terms.
Okay. So what about the next election in Thailand? Are they going to use this issue as a part of their promotional campaign?
You mean the political parties?
Yes.
If you look at the past, it's hard sell. How do you sell this to the rest of the country, the 73 provinces, that we have a group of people who doesn't really embrace our nation statehood or Kwampen Thai, the Thainess. It's a hard sell, so it explains why in the previous election it's never really part of the platform. But having said that, you have a group, the Pheu Thai MP, Pheu Thai Party, is suggesting that we want to give some sort of autonomy. They call it Nakhon Patani, some sort of autonomy to the region. But my point here is that, there are other real issues at hand. My interaction, talking to the people in the south. I live in Yala, and talking to the local community, and they're more concerned about the real issue. Not
just the colorful ads.
Well, exactly. They're more concerned with meat and potato, or rice and fish in this.
That's right.
The real issue, stuff like social mobility, whereas the education for their children, security, equality, and justice. These are real issue for them, not whether their boss is going to be a Buddhist or a Malay, or whether the district chief or the governor is going to be Malay. I think these are the real issues that have to be addressed, because if autonomous, what does it guarantee? It doesn't really guarantee anything, except the very possibility that the head will be switched from, say, a Thai Buddhist to a Malay Muslim.
Well, that's all for our talk today. Thank you, Kun Don, very much for being with us today. ขอบคุณครับ